Hi, I'm Gina, creator and host of Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that is designed to have real talk around all things midlife and strategies to help us live a more vibrant second half. It is my deepest desire to help other people shift the conversation toward empowerment, toward vibrancy, toward excitement about what life has for us and what we can bring to the world, how we can each individually shine our light. So I invite you to grab a cup of something wonderful, to join me each week or when you can, and join me in my living room to have these conversations. And if you are enjoying this, please take the time to subscribe wherever you listen, rate my podcast, and share the episodes that help you, the episodes that encourage you. Let's build this community together. Welcome to my tribe. I'm so grateful you're here. Hello, Feminine Roadmappers. Welcome back to Feminine Roadmap Podcast, the podcast that helps you navigate the challenges and the changes in midlife and to live a more vibrant second half. Today, we are going to be talking about making sense of menopause. My guest today is helping women journey forward into a vibrant second half of life. And I wanted to have this conversation with her because so often we have so much misinformation or negative information. My guest is Susan Willson. She's a women's health expert and the author of Making Sense of Menopause, Harnessing the Power and Potency of Your Wisdom Years. Susan, thank you so much for being with me today.
I'm really happy to be here, Gina. Thanks for having me.
Susan, would you just kind of give us a little bit of a snapshot of who you are and what led you to write a book about menopause and our second half of life?
Sure. I'm a nurse midwife, and in the 45 years that I've been working with women, I've worked with women at all stages of life, from the teenage years through pregnancy, regular GYN work as well as delivering babies. And in the last 20 years have focused mostly on the menopausal transition, probably because that's where I was as well. And one thing that I started to notice, because I set my practice up in order for there to be time for women to tell their stories and really feel like they were being heard. Medical visits have come to be 5 minutes and a prescription these days, and more than half of women never fill their prescriptions because they're not sure it's the right thing for them because they haven't been heard. And you just can't even begin to tell your story or trust someone enough to want to open up to them in a 5-minute visit. So I always did extended visits and encouraged that. And I found that most often women were going through this transition, kind of looking back over their shoulder at what they had lost, rather than being able to face forward at this new phase of life that was coming. And that really interested me and it made me sad. And I started looking into reasons that this might be true. And so that's what kind of led me in the direction of wanting to write a book that fits menopause into the biological arc of a woman's life. And this is when it happens. This is why the things that have happened before now lead up to this. And it's a natural progression and there's purpose to it. And our body helps us with that purpose. So I wanted to show menopause as a positive and purposeful transition that we make, because it literally does change us into a different being than we were before.
I love how you said it's a biological arc in woman's life. Like it's part of our life, not the end of our life. I feel like when people think of menopause, they're afraid. They feel terrorized by the negative information. I was just telling my family, I said, it's like pregnancy and menopause are very similar in that people will tell you their horror stories before they'll tell you anything positive, right?
Yes.
all the scary stuff comes out of the closets. And you're like, why are you telling me this horrible story? Instead of what you're doing and saying, this is a normal, natural part of the arc of a woman's life. And so I'd love to talk about, you said it has a biological purpose.
I noticed the same thing that you noticed, especially back when I was working with pregnancy and delivering babies, that the stories we tell are not the stories about how powerful we feel giving birth or what went right. They were always stories of what went wrong. And you're right, that happens with menopause too. And I think we need to remember that we're educating other women when we do this. It's important that we tell our stories, but at the same time, if all we hear are the horror stories, and then you load onto that the cultural view, the medical view of menopause, that, this is it, it's over for you, it does become very difficult. And to me, when I would look at that and think about that, it just showed me the level of trauma that women actually go through in our medical system, that our story, I felt like women were still in a way processing the trauma they experienced by telling these stories, because there was no place to do that. And I feel like telling our stories is so important. So yeah, it is a biological arc. And if you take a look at the book, you'll see that begins even before the egg that's going to become us launches in our mother's body to become who we're going to become. Genes are already being sequenced based on what's going on in the environment, and our mother's stress levels and our mother's emotions and responses all go into how our fetal brain is developed. And then there's the arc. And I like to remind women that, you've got this, really, you've done this before. We tend to pluck menopause out of the rest of it and say, oh God, here it comes. This is something that's going to happen to you and it's going to be horrible. But it is a natural unfolding of what's been going on the whole time. And even though in our pubescent years, when we first were going through puberty, we didn't have the analytic distance to really look at it and see what was going on. But any woman who's been pregnant knows your body doesn't belong to you anymore, that you're literally being reshaped into a creature that can give birth, nurse a baby, become a mother. And all of this is hormone driven. And the times of hormonal change can be very challenging to navigate. But I like to remind women, you've done this before. And even though you kind of feel like you're in the spin cycle for a while, you find your feet afterwards. And particularly if you're able to embrace the next phase and not be in total resistance to it, then you kind of hit your stride and move on with what the next phase is.
What, in your experience, is the most challenging part of menopause in helping women? Where do you find the greatest challenge?
That's an interesting question. I think the greatest challenge becomes that most women come in when they're really in deep distress. And of course, they want changes fast. They want to be fixed for the moment so that they feel like they can find their feet. I also have women come in ahead of time being proactive, saying, I know this is down the road for me. I want to start putting some things in place that can help with that. What can I do? Now, that's a lot easier because there's not a crisis in the moment, and you can, get the building blocks and the foundation really strong. And those women usually will go through the process without symptoms, without a lot of the disruption. But for most of us, even though we know it's coming, menopause kind of sneaks up on us because we live very busy lives these days. And as women, we always just put one more thing on our plate when it has to go there, and you adapt around it. And make it happen because you're the one that makes things happen. Women are often in the thick of symptoms that seriously disrupt their life, like not being able to sleep at night and being extremely fatigued and irritable and not having their usual buffer zone. All of that kind of sneaks up on you. And then when you finally realize what's going on, there's a bit of a panic that often sets in. So I think setting a container of calm is sometimes the most challenging thing. And I really do like to remind women that if you're having symptoms, that's generally your body showing you what's missing. Your body's always moving toward health. Our bodies are miraculous things. I'm just totally in awe of the human body and all the various things that are going on all at once and work together to give us life and create health. So your body's always trying to move in a positive direction. If you're seeing a symptom, it's not that your body's attacking you and trying to push you down. And I find that when I can help women see what that symptom is trying to accomplish, like where the body's trying to go, and they can get on board with that and work with that, that gives back a measure of control. And they see, oh, it's not just all unraveling and there's nothing I can do about it. Here's where I can join with this and move toward the right direction.
I love that because it really goes along with health in general, right? Our bodies are always pointing us toward what our true north is, what we need, what we need to get rid of, all of those types of things. And you mentioned the building blocks and foundations. For women that are listening that maybe haven't gotten there, like for me, I was telling you off the recording about that company. I did a blood test and they were able to kind of tell me where my body was at and where it was headed. And so I've just had my first skip. I just turned 55 before I had my first period of this year. So I had never skipped unless I was pregnant. And so I'm literally right in the middle of it. And so I have more than one question on this. What's the difference between perimenopause and menopause? Because we throw those words around. And what are the building blocks and foundations that women can begin to anchor themselves into if they feel confused, which I have found a lot of women feel?
So to begin with, menopause is literally a moment in time. It is 1 year after your last period, you are considered to be in menopause, because leading up to that, it's very common to skip periods, sometimes even for 9 months straight, and then begin to have them again because hormonal levels are shifting and changing. So perimenopause is considered the 5 to 8 years prior to the time that you just stop having periods. And that is actually when most women experience most of the symptoms that are disruptive for them. And I think that's part of why we get caught off guard, because when you're in your mid 40s, you're not thinking about menopause yet, and yet so often when symptoms happen, and this happens to both women and to medical care providers, they kind of see them as maybe a harbinger of disease or something being broken, when it might really be a very normal part of perimenopause, but you're just not thinking in that way yet. And it's not uncommon for women to have irregular bleeding, or to find that they're all of a sudden extremely fatigued, or they can't sleep anymore, or they have unexplained weight gain, whatever the symptom might be. And at any other time in life, that might actually mean something's not right. And they'll go into a care provider. And because our medical system is so set up to fix symptoms, we divide the body into all of these little parts, and each one has a specialist, and we do a million tests and try to address symptoms. A woman can go in to see her care provider, and they'll run this whole long battery of tests and follow each symptom down to its conclusion and go, there's nothing wrong with you after all that, without ever really clocking that, this woman's in perimenopause and this all fits together. So the building blocks, and I think this is another reason it's challenging for women, have to do with the adrenal system and our stress levels. Because the way nature has things planned, as the ovaries begin to wind down their hormone production, it's supposed to be the job of the adrenal glands and the fat cells to take over making your hormones for the second half of life. The adrenals have already been making a lot of hormones. In fact, they're really what kickstarts puberty for us in the first place. But we arrive in modern life at midlife with our adrenals exhausted as women, because so many women are in the workforce and bearing and raising children and doing all the household tasks. And as I said, always putting one more thing on their plate. So when they reach menopause, there's nothing there to catch the ball. And I've had women so many times say, yeah, I'm stressed, but no more than usual. I'm adapting, I'm doing what I usually do, and it hasn't been a problem so far. Then I miss 1 period, 2 periods, and all of a sudden I can't sleep at night. My hair's falling out. I'm gaining weight. I'm exhausted. I'm irritable. How can just missing a period cause all that? And the answer is it's not just missing a period that causes it, but it's the whole system that was supposed to be there to catch the ball isn't there. So the ball gets dropped, everything unravels. So certain lifestyle changes that will help to support the adrenals and decrease one's stress are really the most important thing you can do leading up to menopause to make for fewer or no symptoms at all. And yet those are some of the hardest things to ask a woman to do. I find lifestyle adjustments extremely difficult to make. Now, some people, are really into routines. They're able to do that and set this goal and just go for it. But to me, that's a difficult thing to do. So that becomes challenging for women. They want to believe that that's not really that important, or there are always a million very real reasons why they don't feel they can make the adjustments necessary because of everyone who depends on us as women. But yet that's what it takes. That's the building block and the foundation. The adrenal system.
The adrenal system is supposed to be the master system to keep us in balance as our bodies change.
Yes. And it makes sense when you think about it. There are more than one kind of estrogen in the female body, and we always talk about estrogen as if it's one hormone, but there are at least 3 major ones that we work with. And the one that drives the menstrual cycle, our fertilities, our pregnancy, the estradiol, stimulates places in the brain that make you want to make babies, nurture everything in sight, scan partners for their genetic potential. When you see people walk in the door, you look at that. So that makes sense because nature's preparing us to make babies, nurture them, be able to further the species. So at menopause, when the ovaries wind down and the estradiol levels fall, which is where a lot of our symptoms come from, estriol, which is another estrogen hormone, rises. So it's not like we are without estrogen, but one form of it falls and another rises. And estriol stimulates the creative centers of our brain. So women are more, inclined to want to start that business or paint that painting or write that book or whatever it is that, their creativity wants them to do, to give their gift to the world. So in the same way that pregnancy is part of the arc of our life that is making babies and nurturing them, menopause is the part of our life where we're supposed to be creative and to integrate all of the things that we've learned and be able to pass that on.
I love that. Menopause is a time to be creative and integrate that part of us. I feel that I feel that reality.
Mm-hmm. I mean, really, menopause is the harvest. It's the time that we get to pick that juicy fruit and eat it and savor it, and then plant seeds for the next generation to come. So, it is loss of some things, but not others. And this hormone shift that happens is difficult for a lot of partnerships and relationships and things like that, because estradiol, for all the years that it has us being baby machines and nurturers, really has us in a hormonal trance that allows us to do that and kind of be the doormat for our families and for, to allow always one more thing to be put on our plate. And when that shift happens, a lot of times in a partnership, people don't really understand what's happening. All they know is that their partner or mom or whoever that's always, you could always count on to do all of that stuff, isn't, so into it anymore and is asking you to do more. And so a lot of times there are misunderstandings and anger. And it's a time in life when often, relationships dissolve because a couple's not communicating.
That makes so much sense. If you really think about us as biological creatures, which we are, but really thinking about it biologically instead of how we feel or what we're perceiving it with our eyes, if we understand what our bodies are going through, it can help us navigate the changes and the seemingly frustrating, like we feel like we're losing something. I think that is what we see menopause as loss, right?
Yes.
What I hear you saying is menopause has a lot of gains. And since it is a part of that biological arc, as you said, we can see it and partner with it in a way that's going to give us empowerment. Because I feel like we do have a lot of pressure to stay and be young forever. And I think that fertility piece is the quote, being young and staying young is attached to that. And a lot of women feel like when they go through menopause, it's like their youth is gone too. That's at least what women have said to me.
Absolutely. And like I said, I really notice women looking back over their shoulder at what was lost and not seeing what's out there. And the cultural message is very clear. It's very powerful. And women have been shamed for years and years and years. I mean, women's issues, women's bodies, women's approaches to things and feeling have really been shamed and made less than in our culture for a long time. That's changing somewhat. I have a 24-year-old daughter, and I am delighted to see that she and her friends are not taking on that cultural message. But the women going through menopause these days were really brought up in a different time. And menopause doesn't just kind of happen to you. Who you bring to it has so much to do with how you will experience it. And that's one thing that I really wanted to highlight in my book. There's a process in there that women can follow if they're interested, a process of self-inquiry after each chapter to say, well, what was this like for me in my upbringing? Did I have support as I started to become a woman, or was I shamed for that? And what kind of a result did that have? Because I think if we're going to be able to move through this, I think of it as a doorway into menopause. And I believe it's a critical juncture. I see it as a real fork in the road or crossroads or whatever image you want to use. It's usually the time that women either move through and thrive, or they begin to diminish and say, my life is over. And I personally feel like we need the voices of mature women more than ever in the world right now. So I'm wanting to provide support for women to make the choice to move through and thrive. And in order to do that, I think we really need to catch up to present time and kind of detach ourselves from the roles and identities and things that we have played before, that maybe our culture, our religion, or our families or whatever have decided we're going to play, and find out what's authentic for us now and whose voices really went into, telling us that we were this or that, and this is what our role would be in life. And so I'm really hoping women will get together with other women that they trust and maybe do the work of this book together and tell their stories and kind of begin to tease out for themselves, what was somebody else's reflection to me? What did I know about myself at the time? And begin to just, slowly be able to let go of what no longer resonates as authentic. Because if we can stand in the present as authentic beings, knowing who we are, what moves us, what we want to move toward, then we're able to stand powerfully in the world and bring that into fruition.
I know in your book, you talk about midlife course corrections. And as we talk about menopause, there is this tendency to focus on symptoms and prescriptions and the medical side. And I love that this is really touching on the biological side in terms of how it impacts our brains, and really thinking about seeing it as something that we all go through and something that can be a friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the symptoms are real, and often it really takes addressing those symptoms before we have the emotional bandwidth to think about anything else. But menopause is really evolutionary, because the role of women after menopause, time out of mind, has been to evolve the species. There's something that women talk about a lot, right? Well, anthropologists are talking about, called the grandmother hypothesis. And that is, when they looked at old tribal societies and things, when we got to a point where women lived past their reproductive years, they were the ones that moved things forward. They gathered more food. They were able to nurture the young children that couldn't take care of themselves yet, but whose mothers couldn't give them their attention either, because they were already pregnant with the next one. And survival was such an issue. They kind of kept the stories of their tribe. They knew the long view in a way that the younger people didn't. And this really woke up a whole different part, I think, of the human brain, to be able to see a longer view and move out of just primarily survival. And when you look at the only other mammalian species that I'm aware of that does this, that lives into menopause, and a couple of whale species, they have the same role in their pod. If food is scarce, they're the ones that remember the really old hunting grounds, and they can take their pod there so that they can survive. So it's an evolutionary role to be a wise woman. And I think we need to claim that, because the world moves so fast right now, and we're constantly barraged with a million different ways to look at things. There are forces out there trying to polarize us around everything. And it's really going to take, I think, the ability of wise women to stand strongly and create a zone around them almost in their communities and families and things, for positivity, for relationality.
Mm-hmm. It's a standing in the gap is what I hear you saying.
Mm-hmm. We need it.
Yeah, because if someone has, like you said, the long view, the greater perspective, and we can connect to that, we need to build those communities so there's trust, so that we know that what we're hearing or from someone else is for our benefit, right? And so the community that you're talking about would be one built on trust and knowing that, yes, we can, and we can do that in a way that doesn't have to be so aggressive. It can just be confident, right? And secure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because, if you've grown and nurtured a child in your body and raised them, your first response is not going to be to go to military action, if you know what I mean. It's not to be aggressive about things. And women have other ways of looking at things and of working stuff out between people. It's a relational thing. And I believe we're really losing that in this day and age. We're one of the last generations to grow up without devices and without high-speed internet and without this connectivity that we have in that way. And so we used to have real conversations with people, write letters, learn ways of dealing in our communities with people who are different than we are. But when we live our life on, platforms or on the evening news or on the barrage of information coming in, it's so much easier, as I said, to become polarized and to think there and to identify with ideologies rather than what's actually happening. So I feel like it's very important for us as mature women in our families and our communities in whatever way we can to bring that ability to be present that we grew up having and that's getting lost to our children that are coming behind us, because they've got devices in their hands from the time they're 6 months old, So, but the brain at that age is really just wanting to explore the natural world. And so if we can show children presence and just be with them and have the kinds of real life interactions that we're starting to lose, I think that will help put an anchor in.
So we're seeing menopause then as more of a vehicle of influence, if you understand what I'm hearing.
I think I know what you're saying. Yeah. I think that if we move through into menopause as whole as we possibly can be, knowing who we are and what our gift is to give, that brings a kind of presence that you don't really see around you much on a day-to-day basis. And bringing that presence into the world and anchoring it, I feel, is very important right now.
And that's the influence, right? Our bodies are going to change and we are going to experience some symptoms, but there are healthier ways to navigate it. And we get to choose who we are on the other side. And I think mindset around the changes and mindset around what it means is maybe where the shift needs to take place for us.
Mm-hmm. And because it feels overwhelming when it's happening to you, especially if it's one of those situations where it's just kind of crept up on you and then all of a sudden you're in it. But it seems like you would have to get from A to B and it's just too far to travel or too much to deal with. So I really like to remind women, you're always on the path. There is no having to get from A to B. All you do is take one step in a certain direction and it has a huge ripple effect. For instance, just working with sleep, doing one little thing, which is to not be on devices for an hour and a half before you lay down in bed, because whether you're watching TV and think you're relaxing, whether you're on the computer doing email or whatever, those devices raise your cortisol levels, which is going to make it so that you're waking up at 2 or 3 in the morning or you don't sleep well. So just changing that one thing and doing something else in that hour and a half before bed, taking a bath, having your meditation. Then if you do that, reading a book, having a conversation with your partner has a huge ripple effect, because that's when the adrenals do their regeneration, is in the deep sleep at night. So if you're not sleeping, your adrenals can't heal and regenerate, and everything else, that's above that on the pyramid is unraveling a bit. So I've had many women for whom just doing that one thing had such a ripple effect that it gave them back enough wherewithal to begin to deal with the other things. So you don't have to take it all on at once.
That's so encouraging too, because you do feel kind of like you're batting at gnats.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of putting it.
You're like, and then there's this, and then there's that, and then there's this. I have a question about, how people say that you're a thumbprint of your mother. Are we seeing that to be kind of a consistent rule, that the way your mother did menopause is going to somehow influence you? No?
Yeah, I would say no. It has much more to do, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, of who we bring to the process, like our identities as women, how we tend to navigate change and challenge, what our, personal resources are in that way, and our lifestyle and stress. I can't emphasize that enough. All of that has much more to do with what your menopause is going to be like than your mother. And when you think about it, our mothers didn't have much information. They had even less in the way of personal agency than we do in our modern world. They were really, put into certain roles that they were supposed to follow. In my mother's generation, they didn't even really have birth control of any reliable kind until pretty far down the road. Even as a 20-year-old myself, 22-year-old, pills were not used as much. They're still relatively new. So yeah, I think it has much more to do with the other influences than with our biology. Now, it's possible that if you had a mother who went through premature menopause in her 30s or something like that, that there might be some genetic piece that would influence you. But to me, that's fairly far down the list.
Okay. That's good to know, because that is one of those things
that's out there. You're right. Yeah.
You hear it a lot.
Nope.
Yeah.
I think it's an expectation. And I think our expectations often really influence what we manifest. And I think it's often our expectation that menopause is going to be so awful that makes it so for us. Because when you look in other cultures where we don't have that cultural view that when a woman's reproductive years are over, her value decreases, you don't see the same kind of symptoms we have, unless it has become very modernized and women are under a lot of stress. Then you'll see more.
I love the idea, because of course my podcast, this is one of my belief systems, that this is an amazing time of life. And women are sometimes at their most creative and their most impactful.
Yes.
At this time of life. And it's interesting that you mentioned the hormonal piece, the estriol. That's interesting. I mean, I've never heard that before, but we are designed in a biological arc to have roles and purposes. And as they shift, they're not less than. I think it's that focus on looking 20, being fertile, looking like you could be fertile. Because clearly, obviously, the body's like, nope.
Yeah.
But
done with that.
But if we're focused on trying to continue to emulate that season of life while our bodies are moving on, we're missing an opportunity to be fully who we can be now that that's not the most important thing. That's what I'm processing as you're talking. This shift through menopause, as you're managing menopause, you're really navigating yourself into a really powerful season of life. It's unique. And menopause can be almost like a biological reminder to make that shift in many ways.
Nature has a plan, and this is part of it. And it's always, I think, moving toward more power, more integration, and then passing that on in a way that's useful. And one metaphor that I find really works here, even though it feels a little trite to me, is that of the caterpillar and the butterfly, because I remember it really got my attention when I realized the DNA of a caterpillar and a butterfly is exactly the same, 100% exactly the same. The only thing that's happened is that caterpillar has gone into the chrysalis, it's got melted down into mush and reformed into this other creature that if you were to look at the two of them standing next to each other, you would think they were completely different things because they have different physicality, different purpose, different longings, different ways of expressing themselves. And yet they are the same creature that's just gone through a transformation process. And I really see all of our times of hormonal change as a transformation process like that. But at this time of life in menopause, we have more experience, more bandwidth, more brain power to really see it for what it is.
What are your kind of words of encouragement or the vision that you have for women that you're trying to share about this, seeing menopause, managing menopause in a more positive, supportive way? What is it that you would really want women to hear about it? Because we're talking about the balance, we're talking about going that long view, taking that journey and no longer being so point A to point B.
Mm-hmm.
What is that thing that if a woman was in front of you and she was feeling lost in menopause, what would you anchor her to?
Well, I would remind her that her body knows exactly what it's doing and that she has navigated previous hormonal changes successfully, even if it wasn't, most people, as I said, don't really have the analytic capacity to look at their puberty. They just feel like they're in the spin cycle. But if you can look back and see that you've navigated these changes successfully before, then I think it gives you more confidence that you can do it again. And if you know there's something to really look forward to on the other side, that can help to draw you there. I also want to wake women up to the fact that our stress levels have so much to do with how we're going to experience our menopause, so that they can think about this earlier and begin to establish rhythms in their life. And this is another thing I like to talk to women about, especially as they head into their 40s, is that in a way, it's like a bank account. If you create a rhythm in your life as you begin to get older, and your body knows roughly when you're going to be sleeping, when you're going to be eating, what time of day you do your exercise, that sort of thing, then it can have the right amount of energy available for you at those times. Whereas if you're random about it all, your body has to have a high amount of energy available for you because it never knows what's going to be asked of it. So to create a rhythm helps you conserve your energy, which helps keep your bank account full, helps keep your adrenals from just completely emptying themselves out. So if we can start to, number one, see it as a continuum, that this isn't just something that's going to happen to us that we have no control over, that's going to end our lives as women, which is essentially the way it's presented to us. So if it's a continuum with purpose that your body knows what to do with, then we want to get on board with supporting our body in any way we can. So I think creating the rhythms is important. I think being aware of and not buying into the messages of our culture is important. I remember many years ago in medical magazines, the drug company ads of menopause were literally a woman who looked totally dragged down, looking out a window onto a cracked desert. That's what the menopause ads were. They've changed now to where they have gray-haired women acting like 30-year-olds and being very flirty, except that they have gray hair. That's not spot on either. It's a whole different thing. So to really begin to remember who we were, what our passion was. Like women go to me, if they've been in it for a long time with working and raising children and all of that, they go, I don't even remember anymore what excites me or turns me on. I say, well, think back to when you were 10. You knew when you were 10, the hormones hadn't hit yet. 10-year-olds are very wise in many ways. So see if you can, remember what your passion was then. Maybe that will lead you there. So just to begin to think about these things and to vision into a positive future instead of feeling that it's all over.
I love that you call them wisdom years. I feel you encouraging women to learn to trust their bodies. I think listening to our bodies is a whole skill.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Women who maybe have been through health issues might be able to do that more. You know what I mean? Like if you haven't had to pay attention to your body, it's been talking to us all along, but it's not only trusting our bodies, but it's trusting ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And trusting the process that we're in, all of those things.
Trust your body, trust yourself, trust the process. Yeah, that trust the process. My goodness. I love the empowerment, the way that you bring empowerment and such a gentleness to this conversation. How do people find you and your information?
Most of the women that leave here leave feeling hopeful because they begin to remember. They remember their own wisdom. They don't feel caught anymore in a process where something's happening to them, but that they have power in this process. They can direct it and that they can join with their body to make it better. So I would say hopeful. And I'm sure there will be some women out there that might be disappointed that the book is not all about how to deal with your hot flashes. But I figured there are already enough good books out there about how to deal with your hot flashes. I really wanted to reframe this for women. So, and it's my biggest hope, like I said, that women will find a small group of other women that they trust and that they'll start telling their stories and they'll start healing themselves in that way and looking to the root of any issues they might have with self-confidence or self-esteem and go, whose voice was that really? And what's, because there's always what happens. And then there's the story we tell ourselves about what happened or that someone else tells us about what happened. And that's different for everyone. And every family and every childhood is different. But to reclaim that narrative for ourselves, I think is very important.
Wonderful. Well, Susan, I want to thank you so much for being on the show today and for sharing this hopeful message and the broader version of the message, if you will, the more kind of pull back a little bit and look at it in the context of our biological arch and the purpose that it serves instead of just trying to get through it. How can we partner with it? And I really appreciate that perspective. I feel like it's nurturing, it's helpful, it's hopeful, it brings purpose to it instead of fear. And so I'm really grateful for the way you bring this message and that you do bring this message into the conversation.
Well, thank you. I think it's a wonderful time of life. I'm 20 years into it at this point, and I just think it's wonderful. I really recommend it. I recommend menopause.
Well, I want to thank you again for being on the show today and for sharing your wisdom with my tribe.
Sure. I really enjoyed it. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Today, friends, I've been speaking with Susan Willson, women's health expert and author of Making Sense of Menopause, Harnessing the Power and Potency of Your Wisdom Years. If you head over to www.feminineroadmap.com/episode 264, I will have links to her website and her book. And while you're there, please leave your name and email address in the pop-up box. I send out very periodic emails just to encourage you as things pop into my mind. Friends, this is yet another conversation around what it means to be a woman in midlife and beyond, and how that can be the best years of your life, the most powerful, impactful years of your life. This is not a story. This is a truth that each one of us can live into. So take the time, maybe get a copy of this book, get a group of women together, begin to be the change you want to see. It doesn't matter what media says. It doesn't matter even what our families have said. The reality is it's part of nature, and we are designed to make it through to the other side and have greater and more impact in a different way, in a good way. Be hopeful. Get excited about what life has for you. Thank you so much for being with us today, friends. We look forward to sharing more with you in the weeks to come. Take care, my friends. Bye-bye.